They found the ledger before they found her, though it would be weeks before anyone understood what either meant. That autumn evening, a foreman with clean boots and a cold mouth called her cooking hog slop in front of 30 men who had eaten it gratefully for years, and cast her onto the road with a trunk and a wooden spoon. That same night, on that same road, a starving stranger took bread from her hand and did not know he owned the ground beneath his own boots. The wind came down off the Wind River Range that day, carrying the first true bite of winter, and the cook shed smelled of wood smoke and scorched grease, and the particular sourness of 13 years of stew pots, never quite scrubbed clean. She had been at the stove since 4 that morning, same as every morning, her forearms dusted white with flour, her back bent into the low doorway she'd learned to duck through without thinking. 30 men ate what she made twice a day, and not one of them had ever gone hungry under her hand. The new foreman had been 2 weeks on the range when he walked into the mess tent holding her ledger like a dead rat by the tail. He was lean where the hands were thick, sharp-dressed where they were sun-stained, and he stood in the doorway letting the cold in while he read her handwriting aloud in a voice pitched to Carrie. The flour, the lard, the dried apples, numbers she'd kept faithful and square for 13 winters. He called her a waste of good rations. He said a woman her size had no business rationing anyone's food but her own, and the men who might have spoken up looked instead at their boots, because a job was a job and winter was coming. She did not cry in front of them. She had learned long before that widowhood, and the mercantile debt it left behind, did not leave room for the luxury of tears where men could see. She packed her trunk in the low light of the cook shed, the good knife, the tin cups, the cloth-bound ledger she folded into her apron out of habit more than plan, and walked west, toward town with nothing ahead of her but cold and the certainty that 13 years had bought her nothing worth keeping. 2 miles down that rutted road, past where the grass gave way to sage and the light went the color of a healing bruise, she found a man face down near a dry wash, his lips cracked white, his hat gone, his shirt soaked through with old sweat and new blood at the shoulder. He did not ask her name. She did not ask his. She knelt in the dirt, broke the last biscuit from her apron pocket into 2 ragged halves, and pressed one into his cracked hand as though it were the most ordinary thing in the world. He ate like a man who had forgotten food was a kindness and not a right. Neither of them yet knew what the other one owned, or had lost. 6 weeks before that road, before the biscuit and the blood in the dirt, the cookhouse stove was already lit when the rest of the world was still black. She rose in the dark because the dark asked nothing of her that daylight would later demand in judgment. At 4 in the morning, there was no one to measure the width of her hips against the width of the doorway, no one to count how many trips she made from the root cellar before breakfast. There was only the stove, cold iron waiting to be coaxed, and her hands, sure in a way the rest of her life had stopped being sure of anything. She built the fire in stages, the way her mother had taught her on a Missouri farm 30 years gone, kindling first, then the split pine, then the seasoned oak that would hold heat through the frying and the boiling both. By the time the first gray showed at the window, she had 4 skillets going, a pot of beans that had soaked since the night before, and biscuit dough turned out on a floured board scarred pale by 13 years of the same knife strokes. 30 men ate at that outfit, and 30 men ate like men who worked from can-see to can't. She fed them without complaint and without waste, stretching a side of bacon 2 days further than any cook the ranch had kept before her, keeping a running account in a cloth-bound ledger she filled each evening by lamplight. Flour drawn, coffee drawn, sugar drawn, the numbers small and careful in a hand that had taught itself to write from a church primer. It was not glamorous work. It was work that kept men alive through a Wyoming winter, and she understood, the way only someone who had buried a husband could understand, that keeping men alive was not a small thing, whatever the world chose to call it. The old hand, with the 2 missing fingers, took his coffee first, same as always, and lingered by the stove a moment longer than the coffee required. "You're feeding 30 on rations meant for 25, he said. "Someone's been trimming the order sheets before they reach you." She did not stop kneading. The flour barrel's been light 3 weeks running. "I noticed." He turned the cup in his ruined hand. New man handling the ledgers up at the house. Sharp fellow. Boots too clean for range work. She said nothing more on it, because there was bread to turn and coffee to keep from scorching, and 30 men who would be through the door within the hour, expecting their plates full, not their cook distracted by numbers that did not yet add to anything she could prove. But she folded the thought away the same place she folded away the ledger each night, someplace close, someplace she could reach again when the light was better and the stove could wait. Outside, the sky over the ridge had gone the pale color of an old scar, and somewhere past the horse pens a rooster was announcing a day that had, in truth, already begun an hour before it noticed. She rolled the dough thin and thought, not for the first time, that a woman alone had no business owing anyone anything, and yet here she was, 2 winters past her husband's dying, still carrying his debts on her back like a yoke that would not wear smooth. He had gone under the ice on Kell Creek in the January thaw of '76, chasing a heifer that was not worth the chasing, and left her a house she could not keep, a name the mercantile still wrote in its ledger, with a small cold number beside it, and nothing else. No children had come in 11 years of marriage. No brothers, no sisters, no cousins close enough to write to. Her mother had died of the fever the year the railroad came through Cheyenne, and her father before that, and whatever family the marriage had promised her had gone into the ground with the man who promised it. What she had was this kitchen. 13 years of it, through Foreman who came and went like weather, through droughts that thinned the herd and winters that thinned the men, and through it all, she had kept the stove lit and the biscuits rising and the coffee black enough to wake a dead man. The wage was small, it had always been small, but it was the only wage, and every month of it went first to Cheyenne Mercantile against the account her husband had left running. Flour and nails and a length of good rope he had bought on credit the autumn before he drowned. Small things that had added up the way small things do, quietly, until they were not small anymore. She had asked once, the winter after the funeral, whether the debt might be forgiven on account of the circumstances. The clerk had been kind enough about it, in the way of men who have never owed anyone anything themselves, and told her the store did not forgive accounts, only extended them, and extending was itself a kindness she ought to be grateful for. She had thanked him. She had gone home and split her own firewood because there was no one left to split it for her. So the flour barrel running light mattered to her in a way it did not matter to the men who ate from it. A shorted order sheet was not an abstraction to a woman with one wage and no kin to fall back on if that wage stopped. She turned the dough again, folded it, thought of the old hand's ruined hand around his coffee cup, thought of boots too clean for range work, and set the thought away in that same close place, because the biscuits would not bake themselves and the men would be through the door, soon wanting their breakfast, unaware, as men so often were, of how thin the ground beneath a woman's feet could run without ever showing itself on the surface. The bunkhouse talk that morning was thinner than the biscuits, but she caught the shape of it anyway, the way a woman who has spent 13 years in a kitchen learns to catch things not meant for her ears, a name spoken and then dropped, a question answered too quickly. The owner of Kell Creek had not set foot on the range in 8 months. Nobody said it plain. It came out sideways, the way true things did among men careful of their wages. A hand mentioning he'd heard the boss was back east, chasing buyers or chasing something else, nobody could say which. Another saying he'd heard nothing at all, only that a letter had come to the depot in July, and no letter since. She set the coffee pot down harder than she meant to. She had cooked for the man twice in 13 years, maybe 3 times, and both times he had eaten standing at the door with his hat still on, thanking her plainly, and leaving before the meal cooled on anyone else's plate. A quiet man, not a man given to vanishing, not that she had ever known him to be, though what did a cook know of an owner's business beyond what crossed her table? Still, the absence sat oddly with her, the way an ache sits oddly in a tooth that has not yet begun to throb. 8 months was a long while for a ranch this size to run itself on rumor and a hired man's say-so. And into that emptiness, the new foreman had walked, easy as a man walking into an empty house he already had the key to. She turned this over while she scoured the skillet, the iron rasping under the sand and rag, her mind circling it the way it circled a debt she could not yet total. A ranch left too long without its owner was a ranch a certain kind of man could bend to his own shape before anyone with the authority to stop him ever rode back through the gate. She had seen it happen at smaller outfits. A trusted handmade foreman, an owner traveling, and by the time he returned the books, told a story he did not recognize and could not entirely undo. She was not accusing. She told herself she was not accusing. But her eye went again to the order sheet pinned above the flour barrel, to the numbers that did not sit right against what left her kitchen in a week, and she thought that a man confident of scrutiny did not usually flinch at a woman's questions about beef tallies the way this one had, 2 days past, when she'd only asked when the next wagon was due. She wiped her hands on her apron and looked out the kitchen window at the gray reach of morning light over the corrals, at 30 men moving through their chores unaware of the arithmetic she was doing in her head, and she thought, not for the first time, that a ranch could go quiet in more ways than one, and that quiet was rarely as innocent as it sounded from a distance. The foreman had been at Kell Creek 2 weeks when he came into her kitchen without knocking, the way a man walks into a room he believes is already his, and told her the flour ration would be cut by a third starting Monday. She asked why. He said the outfit was tightening its belt for winter, and then he looked at her the way a man looks at a mule he suspects of shirking, and said perhaps she ought to tighten hers as well. There was more of her to feed than there was flour to feed her with. 2 of the hands near the door laughed, though not easily, and one did not laugh at all. The old one, missing 2 fingers on his left hand from a rope that had gone wrong before most of the younger men were born. He kept his eyes on his coffee. She said nothing. She had learned, in 13 years of feeding men who worked from dark to dark, that silence cost her nothing, and words sometimes cost her supper the next morning if the wrong man carried the grudge. She portioned the flour as told, and made the biscuits smaller, and did not tell the hands why, though most of them guessed, because men who work with their hands notice what is missing on a plate faster than they notice what is said in a bunkhouse. The old hand found her at the woodpile 2 evenings later, splitting kindling with more force than the task required. He did not ask why. He only said, low, that he'd seen this kind of foreman before, at an outfit north of Laramie, a man who came in polite and left with the payroll thin and the owner none the wiser, because the owner was 300 miles off and trusted the wrong ledger. He said it the way a man says something he has turned over many times before deciding to say it aloud. He said watch the order sheets. He said watch what leaves in the wagon against what's written down. Then he picked up an armload of split wood and carried it in for her, which was its own kind of sentence, since he had never once in 9 years offered to carry wood into her kitchen before. She began watching in earnest after that. Not the beef counts alone, but the coffee, the salt, the dried apples that vanished from the store 2 crates at a time, with a wagon receipt that never quite matched. She said nothing to the hands. She said nothing to the foreman. She wrote it, instead, in the cloth-bound book stained brown at the corners from 13 years of coffee and flour-dusted hands, the way she wrote everything, patient, exact, unhurried, because a ledger did not laugh at a woman's size, and a ledger, unlike a man, could not later claim it had never said what it plainly showed. The first discrepancy she found was small enough to doubt. A crate of coffee marked, received on the 14th of September, 40 pounds at the mercantile's own printed rate, and beside it, in the foreman's hand, a second figure, higher, initialed and sent on to the owner's account in town, as though the difference had simply evaporated somewhere on the road between the depot and the kitchen. She sat with the 2 numbers a long while by lamplight, turning the page toward the flame. Certain her eyes had misread a 7 for a 2. They had not. She copied both figures into her own book beneath the date, side by side without comment, because comment was not what a ledger was for. Then she began to look for the shape of the thing, the way she looked for the shape of weather before it arrived. Not one cloud, but the pattern of many. She found it in the men's pay slips that passed through her hands each month for the meal deductions she was required to record. A hand's wage, $30, appeared on the outfit's books as $32, the extra $2 a fee for boots or blankets never issued. Sometimes a fine for lateness on days the man in question had been laid up sick in the bunkhouse with her own broth going cold at his elbow. She thought of the young writer from Nebraska who had asked her, embarrassed, whether she thought he was being cheated, and how she had told him no, likely just a clerk's error, because she had not yet had the proof to tell him otherwise. She thought of that now with a discomfort that sat behind her breastbone like a swallowed stone. Dried apples. Salt. A second crate of coffee in October. The wagon receipt torn at the corner where a figure might once have been legible and now was not. 2 months of it, by her count. Maybe more if she pushed back further into pages she had once thought were only about flour and lard, and how many biscuits a man could eat before he called it enough. She did not confront him. She was not fool enough for that, not with 30 men who answered to him, and none who would answer for her. She kept cooking. She kept serving the beef and the beans and the coffee that was, she now understood, thinner than it ought to have been for money that had already been spent on it twice. She kept writing, in her careful hand, the truth as it passed through her kitchen, because a woman with no standing in a room had only one weapon that could not be laughed out of it, and that was a fact set down plainly enough that no one could later say it had not been there all along. The old hand watched her work some evenings and said nothing more, only nodded once, the way a man nods at a fire he trusts to keep burning on its own. She thought, more than once, of walking into the bunkhouse office and laying the ledger flat on the desk and asking him plainly what he meant by numbers that did not add to what the crates held. She thought of it the way a person thinks of touching a stove they have already been burned by, the idea arriving fast, then the memory of the heat arriving faster. She had no husband's name to stand behind her anymore, no brother in the territory, no letter of standing from anyone who mattered to a man who wore his collar stiff and his boots polished, even in October mud. She had a roof over the cookhouse and a bed in the lean-to behind it, and she understood, in the plain arithmetic she had learned from 13 winters of frontier living, that a woman without a roof did not last long once the cold set in for good. So she said nothing. It was not cowardice, or she told herself it was not, lying awake some nights with the wind finding the gap under the door and the stove gone to embers. It was a kind of ledger-keeping of her own, weighing what she could afford to lose against what she could afford to know. She would not lie about the stores. That much she had decided somewhere in the dark without deciding it outright, the way a person discovers they have already made up their mind by noticing they no longer argue with themselves about it. If a man asked her how much flour had come in on the last wagon, she would tell him the truth, to the pound. If he asked how many head of cattle the mess accounts served that week, she would give him the honest count, not the count that flattered anyone. But the theft itself, the shorted wages, the doubled charges, the money bled quietly out of 30 men's pockets by a man who signed his name with a flourish, that she kept behind her teeth, because speaking it aloud would cost her the only ground she had left to stand on, and she was not yet ready to find out what came after that ground was gone. She told herself this was patience, not surrender. She had outlasted drought years, and a husband's slow dying, and a winter that took 2 of the outfit's best horses and nearly took the bunkhouse roof besides. She could outlast 1 lean man in a clean collar, if it meant keeping her hands on a stove and her name off his tongue a little longer. The ledger sat where it always sat, in the drawer beneath the flour bin, and she added to it faithfully each evening by lamplight, numbers only, no accusations, because a fact needed no defending if it was simply true and simply written, and waiting, patient as she was, for someone with more standing than she had ever been allowed to hold it up to the light. The dusk came early that time of year, the sun dropping behind the western ridge like something falling rather than setting, and the cold that followed it had teeth. She was banking the stove for the night, scraping the last grease into the tallow can, when a shadow crossed the cookhouse threshold and stopped there, uncertain, as if the doorframe itself might refuse him. He was gaunt in the particular way of a man who had gone several days on less than he needed. His face was burned dark red across the nose and cheekbones, peeling in patches, and his lips had cracked enough to bleed a little at the corners when he tried to speak. One leg dragged when he shifted his weight, favoring the other with the stiff carefulness of an old injury or a new one gone bad. His clothes had been good once. She could see that in the cut of the coat, the stitching at the shoulders, but weeks of trail dust and sweat had ground the quality out of them until they hung on him the way clothes hang on a scarecrow, more suggestion than substance. "Looking for work," he said. His voice came out rough, like something dragged over gravel. "Heard this outfit might be hiring." She did not ask him why a man looking for work would arrive at dusk, with no horse in sight, no bedroll, nothing but the clothes on him, and a hunger she recognized because she had seen it on her own husband's face in the lean years, and on her own in the mirror, some mornings after the mercantile bills came due. She had learned long ago that a person's story was their own to tell or withhold, and that the asking of it before a meal was its own small cruelty. "Sit," she said, and did not wait to see if he would. She had already banked the stove, but there was a heel of cornbread left in the warming box, and half a pot of beans gone thick with sitting, and she set both before him without ceremony, the way she might have set them before any of the 30 men who ate at her table 3 times a day, and never thought to thank her for it. He ate like a man who had forgotten the shape of a full stomach, slow at first, careful, then faster, until she had to look away from the rawness of it, the way his hand shook lifting the spoon. She did not ask his name. She told herself it did not matter. A hungry man was a hungry man whether he called himself Smith or Sunday, and the ledger in the drawer beneath the flour bin did not care who ate what she cooked, only that the cooking got written down, honest and small and hers. She refilled his coffee once, watched the color come back slow into his cracked lips, and went on with her banking of the fire, as if a stranger, eating alone in a dark cookhouse, were the most ordinary thing in the world. The fire settled into a low red breathing under the grate, and she fed it 2 more sticks, not because it needed them, but because her hands needed something to do besides watch him eat. He was not a man built for smallness, she could see that, even hunched as he was over the bowl, shoulders too broad for the bench, boots too long for the space beneath the table, and yet he ate with a care that surprised her, spoon lifted slow, eyes down, as though eating fast might make it stop being real. He did not look at her face. He watched her hands instead, the way they moved over the stove lids and the flour bin and the drawer she never quite let him see into, and something in that watching felt less like hunger and more like a man reading a ledger of his own, tallying what kind of woman fed a stranger nothing but kindness on a night she had nothing left to spare. "Obliged," he said, the one word coming out rough, like it had been carried a long way before it reached his mouth. She nodded and did not answer beyond that, because 30 years of feeding men had taught her that thanks wanted only silence in return, not conversation. He ate a while longer. Then he set the spoon down, careful, the way a man sets down something he does not want to break, and looked into the bowl instead of at her. "This is thin," he said, "not unkind, just plain, the way a man states weather. Beans and water mostly, not much fat in it, not much meat." She felt the words land somewhere under her ribs, though she kept her face as still as she had learned to keep it years ago, back when a face that showed too much only ever bought her more grief. "Stores have been thin a month now," she said, "since the new foreman took to signing for the orders himself." She said it plain, too, the same weather-flat tone he had used, because she had decided long before this night that she would not sound bitter in front of a stranger, even if bitterness sat in her like a stone. "He says the outfit's tightening its belt. Hands don't complain to me. They eat what's put in front of them, same as always." He was quiet at that, longer than the answer seemed to need, and when he looked up, his eyes had gone sharp in a way that did not match the raw sunburn or the cracked lips or the general ruin of a man who had clearly ridden farther than his body wanted to carry him. It was the look, she thought, of someone doing sums in his head and not liking the total. "How long you been cooking here?" he asked, and it was not idle. 13 years, she said, and went back to the fire, because it was easier to talk to iron than to a man whose eyes had just changed shape in front of her. He did not press her on the 13 years, though she felt him turning the number over the way a man turns a coin to check it isn't shaved. The fire popped. Somewhere off in the dark, a horse she had not noticed before shifted its weight and blew air through its nose, and she understood then that he had not walked in on foot after all, that there was an animal tethered somewhere past the firelight, worn as thin as its rider. Foreman got a name, he said, not quite a question. Foreman's got several, depending who you ask. She kept her eyes on the pan. Man who hired him calls him a good bargain. Hands call him something else when he's out of hearing. She hesitated only a moment before giving it plain, because there seemed no harm in a name to a stranger who would be gone by morning. Whitfield, Ambrose Whitfield. Come on, about 2 weeks before. She stopped herself there, the way she had stopped herself all evening from finishing that sentence with, "Before he threw me off the place like a sack gone to rot." Before what? Before the season turned, she said, and it was not quite a lie, only a smaller truth standing in front of a larger one. She watched him work the name in his mouth without saying it aloud again, the way a man tastes something to see has it gone sour. His jaw was still. His hands, she noticed, had stopped their idle turning of the tin cup and gone flat and quiet against his knee, and there was something in that stillness that unsettled her more than any sudden movement would have. She had spent 13 years reading men by their hands before their faces, which ones reached for the pot too eager, which ones held back out of shame, which ones you could trust to carry a full kettle without spilling it on a child underfoot, and this man's hands had just told her something his face was working hard not to. "You said the hands don't complain to you," he said finally. "They don't. They complain to each other." She did not answer that directly, because it was true, and because the truth of it was not hers to hand over to a stranger, on the strength of one shared biscuit, and a fire she'd have needed to build anyway. "I keep the kitchen," she said instead. "What happens past the kitchen door isn't mine to carry tales about." "Loyal," he said, and there was no mockery in it, only the same flat weighing tone as everything else he'd said that night, as if loyalty were another line item he was entering into a ledger she could not see. "Practical," she corrected. "A cook who talks doesn't stay a cook long." He looked at her then, a long, unhurried look that took in the flour still ground into the creases of her knuckles, the trunk roped shut behind her in the dark, the road she had clearly been walking with, nowhere in particular waiting at the end of it, and whatever he was adding up, he did not share the sum. He only nodded once, slow, and let his eyes go back to the fire, and the quiet that settled over the two of them then was not the easy quiet of before. The cold came down harder once the talk had stopped. It did not announce itself the way a storm did, with wind and warning. It simply arrived, settling into the ground and the bones of anything that stood on it, until the fire seemed less a comfort than a small, stubborn argument against the night. She fed it twice more before she judged it would hold till dawn, and each time the sparks went up into a sky gone hard and clear, the kind of sky that meant frost by morning, the kind that had killed cattle in bad years and would, if it wanted to, kill a man sitting too still beside a wagon wheel. He had gone quiet in the particular way of someone conserving what little he had left. She had seen that quiet before, in her husband the last winter, in hands brought in off the range with their hands too stiff to close around a cup. It was not sleep, it was closer to a kind of careful waiting. She rose without saying why she was rising, because explaining herself to a stranger seemed like one more thing she did not have the strength to spare, and went to the trunk roped shut in the dark. Her fingers found the rope knot by memory rather than sight. Inside, folded flat beneath the tin plates and the good knife and the small collection of things a life accumulates without meaning to, was a wool blanket, gray gone thin at the fold, the same one that had covered her husband's shoulders the winter before he died, and hers every winter since. It was not new. It had never been fine, but it was the only one she had, beyond the one already wrapped around her own knees, and giving it away meant she would sit colder for the rest of the night than she had planned to. She did not deliberate over it long enough to call it a decision. That was not how she did things. She had fed men who couldn't pay for 13 years, on the strength of the same unexamined instinct, and this was no different in kind, only in size. She laid it over his shoulders without a word of ceremony, the way she might have set a plate down in front of a hungry hand, and stepped back before he could refuse it, or thank her for it, because either would have made more of the thing than she wanted made. He looked up at her, startled out of his stillness, and for a moment, something moved across his sunburned face that was not quite surprise, and not quite something older than surprise. He did not ask if she could spare it. Perhaps he already knew, from the trunk, from the road, from the flower ground into her knuckles, that she could not really, and had given it anyway. "You'll be cold," he said, the first unweighed thing he had said all night. "I've been cold before," she said, and sat back down across the fire, and did not offer him anything more to argue with. The stranger had come up from the creek bottom at midday, gaunt under sunburn, his boots split at the seam, and he had not asked for charity so much as stood near the chuck wagon the way a starved dog stands near a fire, not begging, just present, hoping someone would notice without making him say the word. The foreman noticed first, and told him to move along. She was straining coffee grounds through cheesecloth when she saw the man sway on his feet, and something in her, the same something that had fed 13 years of drifters, orphaned hands, and broke cowpunchers off the books, made her set down the pot. She did not touch the kitchen stores. She knew better than that by then. The foreman had taken to counting flour sacks like a man counting his own gold. Instead, she carried over her own tin plate, the noon ration she had not yet eaten, and set it in the stranger's hands without a word. He ate like a man who had forgotten. Food came in anything smaller than a whole animal, and she stood there, wiping her hands on her apron, watching the color come back into his face in slow degrees, the way frost leaves a window when the sun finally clears the ridge. That was when the foreman came around the wagon. He had a way of walking when he meant to make a scene, a little slower than his stride wanted, so every hand within earshot had time to look up. 30 men were within earshot. Branding was done for the day, and they stood loose around the corral rails with the particular idleness of men waiting to be told they could eat. He asked her what she thought she was doing, giving away rations to a man who hadn't put in an hour's work on the outfit. She said the man was hungry. He said hungry men were common as flies on this range, and she didn't see him feeding all of them, and then his eyes went over her, slow and deliberate, the way a buyer looks over stock he has already decided not to purchase. He said perhaps that was the trouble with her cooking generally. There was too much of it going somewhere it oughtn't, and not enough sense behind the giving of it. He said the outfit had carried her long enough. He said her food was fit for hogs, and her figure proved she'd been eating twice her share of it for 13 years, and the men could go hungry until they found someone who knew the difference between feeding a crew and fattening herself. Someone laughed, not all of them, but someone did, and that was the sound she would carry longest, not his words, which she had half expected since the day he arrived, but that single laugh rising up out of 30 men she had fed through blizzards and branding seasons and one bad spring of scarlet fever, men whose plates she had never once let go empty, even when her own sat cold. She did not answer him. She set the tin plate down on the wagon gate, careful, the way she set down anything that mattered to her, and she walked to the cook tent and took up her one trunk, the same trunk that had come west with her husband 13 years before, now packed light because there had never been much to put in it, and she folded her apron on top of the ledger, the cloth-bound book gone soft and coffee-stained at the corners from years of her own hand, and she closed the lid. No one spoke while she did it, 30 men and not one word, only the sound of the latch closing and her own boots in the dust, walking away from the fire that had been, for 13 years, hers to keep. The road to town ran 6 miles through sage flats gone gray with early dusk, and she walked it the way she did everything else, steady, unhurried, as if the ground itself owed her nothing, and she expected nothing from it. The trunk banged against her hip with every other step. Her breath came short before the first mile was done, but she did not stop, because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant remembering the sound of 30 men laughing at something that was not funny. She had not gone a quarter mile past the creek crossing when she heard the second set of boots behind her. He was easy to place even in the failing light, the man from the fence line that afternoon, the one who had watched the whole business from horseback and said nothing, sunburned raw across the neck, a week or more of trail dust ground into a coat that had once been decent. He fell into step a few paces back, not close enough to trouble her, not far enough to pretend he wasn't following. "You've got no cause to walk with me," she said, not turning. "Didn't say I had one. Town's the other direction from wherever you're headed, I'd wager." Might be. She stopped then, turned enough to look at him square, the trunk set down in the dust between them like a fence post. He was a big man, bigger than she'd taken him for at a distance, shoulders gone lean with hunger rather than work, and there was something careful in the way he held himself, like a man rationing his own strength. His boots were good boots gone bad from wear. His hands, when she looked at them, were clean under the dirt, not a laborer's hands, not exactly, though they'd clearly done labor lately, and recently, and hard. "I don't need company," she said. "I need a place to sleep that isn't a ditch, and I doubt you've got one of those in your pocket." "No," he admitted. "I don't." "Then go on." He didn't. He only looked past her, down the darkening road, toward the lights that hadn't yet appeared over the rise, and something in his face, tired, sun-cracked, patient in a way that unsettled her more than any hunger could, told her he had nowhere better to be than exactly where he was. She picked the trunk back up. Her arm ached from the weight of it, and her feet ached worse. And somewhere behind her, the fire she had tended for 13 years was already being let go cold by men who didn't know how to bank coals properly, who would burn good wood for nothing come morning. She pushed the thought down and kept walking, and he kept pace behind her, silent again, and neither of them said another word for the better part of a mile, until the ache in her legs and the weight of the trunk and something else entirely, something she did not yet have a name for, made her slow, just slightly, so that he was no longer behind her, but beside her. The wind had shifted while they walked, coming now from the north instead of the west, and it carried the particular cold that meant frost by morning, the kind that would silver the ruts and stiffen the canvas of the wagon covers, back at the outfit she no longer belonged to. She felt it through the wool of her sleeves and did not comment on it. She had walked colder roads than this one. He had begun to favor his left leg, a small hitch in his stride he was trying to hide and failing at, and she noted it the way she noted everything about hunger and weakness, from 13 years of feeding men who would rather starve than admit they were starving. She stopped without announcing that she was stopping. She set the trunk down in the frozen grass at the road's edge and knelt beside it and undid the leather strap and lifted the lid, and inside, wrapped in a flour sack cloth gone soft from washing, was the biscuit she had saved that morning, before any of it happened, before the 30 men and the foreman's voice cutting the air like a blade dragged too slow through meat. It was the last food she owned in the world. She did not think about that until later. She held it out to him. He looked at it, and then at her, and something crossed his sunburned face that she could not read in the failing light. Not surprise exactly, something older and more careful than surprise. "That's yours," he said. It was. "You don't know a thing about me. I know you haven't eaten." She did not lower her hand. "I've fed worse men on less reason." He took it the way a man takes something he has decided not to argue about, slowly, with both hands, as though the biscuit itself might object. He did not wolf it down. He broke it in half first, and for one absurd moment she thought he meant to give part of it back to her. But instead, he simply ate it that way, in halves, methodical, the way a man eats who has trained himself out of desperation through long practice. And she understood, watching him, that this was not the first time he had gone hungry on a road with no one watching. There was no gratitude in his face, not the performing kind she'd seen from men who wanted something after. There was only a kind of stillness, chewing slow in the cold, his eyes on the dark line of hills ahead rather than on her. "You didn't ask my name," he said finally. "Didn't seem the hour for it. Most people ask. Most people want something back." She closed the trunk lid and buckled the strap with fingers gone stiff from cold. "I didn't figure you had anything to give." He was quiet a long moment, brushing crumbs from his palm with a care that seemed out of place in a man his size. And then he said, low, almost to himself, "That's where you're wrong." She didn't ask what he meant. She only picked up the trunk again, and this time he took the other handle without being asked, and they walked on into the dark together, toward the lights that still hadn't shown themselves over the rise. The road narrowed where it dipped into a dry wash, and the trunk swung between them with a rhythm that made talking easier, the way work always had for her, easier than sitting still and facing a man's eyes. He asked about the ledger first. Not what it was. He seemed all ready to know, or to guess. But how she kept it? Daily, she told him. Every sack of flour, every side of bacon, every pound of coffee logged the evening it came in, and logged again the morning it left the shelf for the cook fire. 13 years of it, she said, in the same cloth-bound book, the cover gone soft and dark at the corners from handling. And the rationing, he said, when did that start? 2 months back, maybe a little more. She shifted her grip on the handle. Flour first, then the coffee, then the salt pork. Foreman said the supply wagon was running behind on account of the weather, and I believed him the first time. And the second time, I kept believing him longer than I ought to have. A woman my size arguing with a man about food looks like greed to anyone watching. I learned that early. She said it plainly, without bitterness, the way she might report the weight of a sack of meal, and he did not flinch from it or offer comfort, which she found she preferred. He asked about pay next, whether the hands had said anything, whether wages had come late or come short. She told him what she knew, which was less, since money was not her ledger to keep, only food. But she'd heard the grumbling in the bunkhouse line, seen the way certain men counted their coin twice before pocketing it, quiet, like they were checking a wound to see if it still bled. She told him this too, watching his jaw work as he listened, the muscle there tightening and going slack like something chewing on itself. You wrote all this down, the stores, I mean, every day. Every day for 13 years. A body forgets things if she doesn't. Where's that book now? In the trunk. She patted the lid without stopping. I wasn't about to leave it behind for him to burn. He didn't answer that, but something in his stride changed, lengthened, and she found herself half a step behind before she adjusted. She had nothing left to lose in the telling of it. No position to protect, no favor to curry, no fear that plain speech might cost her a place already taken from her. And so she answered every question he put to her fully, without softening the shape of it, the way she might have told the truth to no one in 13 years of careful silence. The hills ahead still gave no sign of light, but the questions kept coming, careful and exact, like a man counting something he meant to add up correctly the first time. He asked her finally how long the shorting had gone on, and she told him 2 months by her count, maybe closer to 10 weeks if she counted the week the flour order came in short and nobody said a word about it. He nodded at that the way a man nods at a sum he already suspected. Then he stopped walking. It was not a dramatic stopping. He simply planted his boots in the road dust and stood, and she went 2 steps past him before she noticed and turned. The last color was draining out of the sky behind the western ridge, a thin rind of orange going gray, and in that failing light his face looked older than it had an hour before, or perhaps only more tired of holding something back. I own that ranch, he said. She did not answer right away. The words arrived plain, without ornament, the way a man states a fact about weather or distance, and for a moment she simply looked at him. At the sun-cracked lips, the shirt gone the color of the road, the hands that had trembled over a biscuit 2 hours before, and tried to fit the words to the man standing in front of her. It would not fit. She had fed hunger, not power. She had spoken to him as she would have spoken to any starved stranger on a road going nowhere, and that plainness could not be unmade now, whatever he said next. Kell Creek, he said, when she still hadn't spoken. All of it. The house, the herd, the paper on the land. 11 weeks now, I've been riding it without a name, sleeping where the hands sleep, eating what gets put in front of them, because every season for 3 years, I've come home to find good men gone and no one able to tell me why past shrugging. I hired Foreman from Cheyenne, from Laramie, men with fine references, and they run it a season or two, and something rots underneath, and I don't see it until the rot's already cost me hands I can't replace. His jaw worked again, that same chewing motion. I meant to find out for myself this time. Ride through as nobody. Watch. And did you, she said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected, though something in her chest had gone very still, the stillness of a held breath she hadn't decided to take. I found out today, he said. Watched a man stand 30 hands in the yard and call a woman's cooking fit for hogs, and not one of those 30 said a word against it, because a foreman's word is law out here, and they've learned better than to test it. He looked at her a long moment. Then I watched the woman he'd shamed hand her last food to a stranger on the road, without asking his name. The wind moved through the sage, and did not answer for either of them. She thought of the ledger in the trunk, coffee-stained and faithful, 13 years of numbers, that had never once lied to her, even when everything else on that ranch had begun to. She thought of 30 men standing silent in a yard, while a lean man in a clean coat spoke cruelty like it was policy. "Then you know what's in that book," she said, "is worth more than my say-so." "I know," he said. "We're not walking to town anymore." They turned back toward the ranch house together, and for 100 yards neither of them spoke, the silence filling with something that was not quite anger, but stood close beside it. She walked the way she had walked all day, steady, unhurried, but her mind had begun to work at the thing he'd said, the way a tongue works at a sore tooth, unable to leave it alone. 11 weeks, he'd told her, riding under no name. 11 weeks of watching men work themselves thin and say nothing, of sitting at cook fires he had no right to sit at, eating food he hadn't paid for with anything but silence. And she had fed him her last biscuit, believing him only hungry, only tired, only a stranger with sunburn peeling off his neck, and dust worked so deep into his collar it had turned the cloth the color of the road itself. "You let me think you were nothing," she said finally. "A drifter, a man with no coin and no home." Her voice did not rise, but it had an edge in it now, thin and cold as the wind coming down off the ridge. "You watched 30 men stand there and let that happen to me, and you didn't step out of that crowd. You could have stopped it before it started." He did not answer right away, and the not answering told her something too, though she could not yet have said what. "I could have," he said at last. "I didn't." "Why?" "Because I needed to see it plain, not softened for the owner's benefit, not staged." He kept his eyes on the road ahead of them, not on her. A man who's watched, he plays a part. I've had Foreman march men through chores, like a parade. The 1 week a year I rode the range myself. I wanted the ranch as it was on a Tuesday nobody thought mattered. So I was the Tuesday, she said. I was the test. He didn't flinch from that, and something in her wanted him to. Wanted some crack of shame to show through the sunburn and the dust, because a man who flinched could be forgiven easier than a man who simply stood in the truth of what he'd done and let it be true. "You were," he said. "I won't tell you different." The wind picked up a little, carrying grit against her skirt, and she thought of the foreman's mouth curling around the word. Hogs. In front of 30 men, and she thought of this man's eyes on her from somewhere in that same crowd, watching, weighing, saying nothing while it happened, only different from the foreman, in that his silence had a purpose behind it, and the foreman's cruelty had none. She was not certain, walking that road in the last gray light, that a purpose made it kinder. A wound didn't much care why the knife had been drawn. "You could have told me on the porch," she said, "before I emptied my flour bin into a man's hat like a fool." "I could have," he said again, and offered nothing further, no defense, no softening, only the plain fact of it standing between them, same as the trunk lashed behind them in the wagon, heavy with 13 years of numbers that had never once lied to her. She walked on beside him in a silence that had teeth in it now, and did not yet know whether she meant to forgive him before they reached the yard, or only to see, first, what he intended to do once they did. The wagon wheels found a rut and settled into it, and for a while, the only sound was the creak of the axle and the wind combing through the sage. She kept her eyes on the road ahead, on the pale ribbon of it disappearing into dusk, and waited for him to say something that would make the silence worth breaking. "I want you back at the stove tonight," he said finally. "Not tomorrow, tonight." "Charity's a poor substitute for wages," she said. "I've had enough of men deciding what I need." "It isn't charity." His voice was flat, without heat, the voice of a man accustomed to being believed the first time. "I've had 4 cooks quit this outfit in 2 years. Men who could season a stew but couldn't keep a ledger straight, or who kept it straight, and let themselves be talked out of what it said. I need somebody who won't be moved. Not by flattery, not by a fist on the table, not by a man in a clean coat, telling her the books say different than what she wrote in her own hand. She turned that over, the way she turned over a coin to check its weight. It was not a compliment, not exactly. It was closer to an inventory, the same cold accounting she'd given flour sacks and coffee tins for 13 years, only now the thing being weighed was her. "You're describing a mule," she said, "stubborn and useful." "I'm describing the only kind of cook worth having," he said, and something in the corner of his mouth almost moved, almost, before it settled again into the same weathered stillness. The rest bend. "You didn't bend for him this morning, you packed a trunk." She thought of the trunk now, lashed behind them, and the $2 folded inside her boot, and the mercantile ledger in town, with her husband's debts still standing against her name like a fence she couldn't climb. Pride was a fine thing to carry when a woman had food in her larder and a roof that didn't leak. She had neither. Pride, empty-handed, was just another weight to drag toward town in the dark. "And if I say no," she said, "if I tell you, I'd rather take my chances at the boarding house and never see that yard again. Then I'll have wasted a day's ride finding out what I already knew," he said, "that the trouble was never the meals." The wagon rocked over a stone. Somewhere behind them, small and stubborn, a nighthawk called twice and went quiet. She thought of 30 men standing in the yard that morning with their hats in their hands, none of them meeting her eye, and she thought of the same 30 men she would have to walk past again if she turned this wagon around, not as the woman who'd been thrown out, but as the woman who'd come back on a stranger's word before she'd even seen the color of his money. "I want it in writing," she said. "Wages. Say it plain, and put it on paper, same as I keep my ledger. I've trusted a man's word before, and buried what it cost me." He nodded once, as if she'd asked for nothing more than salt for the table. "Turn the wagon," he said. The ranch house showed lit long before the wagon reached it, and that alone told her something had been set in motion that could not be called back. He had sent the boy ahead on the mule, she realized, sometime while she slept against the sideboards without meaning to. Lanterns hung from the porch rail and from the fence posts, swinging faintly, throwing long yellow bars across the dust. Men were already gathering in the yard in their shirt sleeves, roused from bunks, rubbing sleep from their faces, murmuring to one another, in the low voices men use when they sense something has shifted beneath them and they have not yet been told what. He climbed down from the wagon before it had fully stopped and did not wait for her, but neither did he leave her behind. He simply moved toward the porch, the way a man moves toward work that has been waiting too long, and the hands parted for him without knowing why they did. She followed at her own pace, her boots heavy with a day's dust, the trunk still roped behind her in the wagon bed. She saw the foreman come out onto the porch last, buttoning his coat, his face arranging itself into the same easy contempt he'd worn that morning, and she watched it falter, just slightly, when he understood who stood in the lantern light below him. He did not raise his voice. That was the thing she would remember longest, that he never once shouted. He set the ledger on the porch rail, cloth cover soft and coffee-stained under the light, and he opened it to the pages she herself had inked, the small, careful numbers that had meant nothing to her until a stranger on a dusty road had asked to see them by firelight. "This is the cook's book," he said. "Every sack of flour, every side of bacon, every dollar that come through this kitchen for 13 years, written plain." He turned a page. "And here's where the orders don't match what left town. Here's where the hands' wages got shorted against what the account shows paid." He looked up. 2 months of it, maybe longer. The foreman's mouth opened, some word of explanation rising and dying before it reached air, because there was nothing in a ledger that argued back, and 30 men were watching him try to find one. "You're done here," he said, and it was said the way a man closes a gate, without cruelty and without appeal. "Draw what's owed you fair from what's left, and be off the range by morning." No one moved to defend him. A few would not meet his eye, the way they had not met hers that morning, and she understood without being told that shame changes hands as easily as coin. Then he turned toward her, standing at the edge of the lantern light with her trunk still in the wagon, and 30 faces turned with him, waiting to hear what would be said next, and whether the woman they had watched walked out that morning would be the one walking back in. He set the ledger down on the table, squaring it with both hands, as though it were a thing that might slide off the edge of the world if he did not hold it steady. "Martha Kell has cooked for this outfit 13 years, he said. 13 winters, 13 calvings. She kept books straighter than any foreman I've hired before or since. And she did it while feeding 30 men 3 times a day on a budget that would have starved half the outfits in this territory." He paused, and the pause had weight to it, the kind that made men look at their boots. "She was let go this morning in front of all of you for the crime of her size, by a man who was stealing from you at the same time he called her worthless." No one spoke. The wind found a gap in the boards somewhere and worried at it, a thin whistling underneath everything he said. "She's cook here again," he went on, "starting now. Her wages doubled from what they were, backdated to this morning, and the kitchen answers to her and no one else. Not to a foreman, not to me, when I'm not here, which is most of the time. To her." He looked around at them, one face and then another, unhurried. "Any man who has trouble taking orders about pots and rations from a woman can draw his pay same as the one who just left." Nobody moved toward the door. She stood at the edge of the lantern light with her hands folded in front of her apron, and she could not have said afterward what she felt in that moment, only that it was too large and too sudden to be named anything so small as happiness, more like a held breath finally let out after a night of holding it without knowing. The old hand stood near the back of the gathered men, his ruined hand tucked against his side out of old habit, and he was not looking at her. He was looking at the rancher, at the place where the big man's hand rested on the ledger, and he saw what she did not, a small tremor in it, barely there, the kind of thing a man might mistake for cold if he did not know better. And the old hand knew better, because he had seen men's hands shake before, after a fight, after a decision that cost something to make plain in front of 30 witnesses. He said nothing. He filed it away the way he filed everything, quietly, for later, the way a man does who has learned that most things worth knowing are not worth saying aloud. The rancher closed the ledger and did not open it again that night. "Go on back to your bunks," he told the men, and they went, filing out into the cold in 2s and 3s, murmuring low. And none of them looked at her the way they had that morning, though whether that was shame or something closer to respect, she could not yet tell, and did not trouble herself to guess. The old hand lingered a moment longer than the rest, his eyes moving from her to the rancher and back again, before he touched his hat brim to her and followed the others out into the dark, leaving the two of them alone with the lantern and the ledger and the long night still ahead of them. The days that followed settled into a rhythm she had not felt in 13 years, not since before the debts, not since before the winters had started taking things from her one by one. The kitchen was hers again, fully hers, and she moved through it the way a woman moves through a house she built with her own hands, touching the stove, the shelves, the ledger's replacement. A new book, uncoffee-stained, waiting to be filled, as though reacquainting herself with what had never truly left her, only been taken from her sight. The hands ate better. That was the plainest truth of it, the one that needed no interpretation. Where there had been thin stew stretched to cover shorted stores, there was now meat enough, bread enough, coffee strong and without apology. Men who had grown quiet and hollow-eyed through the autumn began to talk again at table, began to linger a few minutes past the meal instead of bolting for the door, and she noticed the change the way she noticed weather, without needing to be told its cause. A girl came up from town in the second week of November, 15 years old, thin-wristed, the daughter of a widow herself, and the rancher had arranged it without asking her first, which irritated her, only until she saw the girl's hands, quick, careful, unafraid of heat or grease. She taught her the way she had once been taught, by doing rather than saying, showing her how to judge dough by feel, how to keep a fire even through a long afternoon, how to stretch a haunch of beef across 2 days, without anyone at table feeling cheated. The girl called her ma'am at first, then something warmer within a month, and she found she did not mind being needed in that particular way. the way of someone passing on a trade rather than simply performing it. The rancher did not linger in the kitchen the way another man might have, full of talk and reassurance. He came instead in small, practical ways. A delivery of dried apples he had ridden 2 days to fetch, a new hinge for the pantry door that had been sagging since before the old foreman's time, a question about whether the coffee needed to be ordered before the passes closed for winter. She answered him in kind, without ceremony, and somewhere in the exchange of these plain necessities, a rhythm grew between them that neither named and neither hurried. He ate at the long table with the hands most evenings, same as always, but she began to notice he sat a little longer after the plates were cleared, that he asked after the stores, not out of suspicion now, but out of something closer to interest in her judgment, and that when the old hand made some dry remark about the girl's improving biscuits, the rancher's eyes went first to her before he laughed, as if to see whether she found it funny too. Snow came early to the high pastures that year, and with it, the slower work of winter, mending harness, counting stock, waiting. She kept the kitchen warm through it, kept the new ledger honest, kept the girl's hands busy and her own steady, and if anyone in town still spoke of hogs and grease in low voices, none of it reached the kitchen door, where the fire burned even and the debts, she had begun to notice, were shrinking a little every month. By March, the last of the mercantile debt was gone. She walked into town on a Tuesday with the final sum wrapped in a handkerchief and set it on the counter herself, and the clerk who had once slid her a shorter tab than what she owed, back when her husband was 2 winters in the ground, and everyone assumed she would default, counted it twice before he wrote the receipt. She did not tell him what it had taken to get there. She did not need to. The paper was proof enough, and paper, she had learned, was the only kind of proof that mattered to men who had never once looked past a person's size to see what she carried. The new foreman started the week the passes opened. She had a hand in the choosing. The rancher had asked her outright, at the long table one evening, who among the men she trusted to be fair with the stores and fair with the hands, and she had named a quiet, sun-cracked rider who had never once complained about her portions, nor asked for more than his share. He proved steady. He kept the ledgers honest without being told to, and when he came to her for the week's provisions, he asked rather than demanded, which she had come to understand was the whole of what separated a decent man from the kind that got themselves dismissed in front of 30 hands by lantern light. The girl from town had grown handy enough by then to run the kitchen alone for a morning without scorching a thing, and on the mornings she did, the widow found herself with an hour to sit on the porch step with a cup gone lukewarm in her hands, watching the mud dry to dust on the yard, and the calves testing their legs in the near pasture. The rancher took to sitting with her some of those mornings, saying little, same as always, though the little had changed its shape over the winter into something that did not need saying to be understood. She thought sometimes of the room that had judged her, the 30 men standing silent while the foreman called her cooking fit for hogs, the heat of that shame that had walked with her half the road to town. She did not forgive it, exactly. But she had stopped carrying it the way she once did, because she had come to see it plain. That room had never once decided what she was worth. It had only decided what it was willing to admit, and admission, she had learned, was cheap and cost a man nothing to withhold. Worth was decided elsewhere, at the table, in the eating, in the men who came back a second time for more of what she'd made and said so, or didn't say so but came back anyway, which was truer than words. The ledger sat in a drawer now, its coffee stain faded but not gone, retired from evidence back into its old plain use, columns of flour and salt pork and coffee beans in her steady hand. She kept it the same as she always had. Some things did not need changing to be worth keeping. She had learned that too, along with the rest of it, in the 13 years before and the half a year since, that a life could be judged and dismissed by a room in a single evening, and rebuilt just as plainly, meal by meal, by the ones who simply stayed to eat.